She arrived at the blind date looking like she had nothing, but the CEO saw everything he'd ever wanted in her. The rain fell steadily over Brooklyn, painting the sidewalks with silver reflections and wrapping the city in a soft, rhythmic hush. Inside a small vintage restaurant tucked between two brick buildings on a quiet street. The warm glow of hanging Edison bulbs cast a golden hue across the polished wooden floors and weathered leather booths. Outside the fogged-up windows, umbrellas floated by like slow-moving ships. James Cartwright sat alone at a corner table near the window, his blazer draped neatly over the back of the chair beside him. His wristwatch caught the light as he checked it again. He was 31, sharp-featured, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with the kind of controlled poise that only years of business negotiations and heartbreak could teach. A man of precision, of expectations, of disappointment. He sighed quietly, glancing once more toward the entrance. He had no reason to expect anything different from this blind date. Just another awkward exchange, another hour lost. He had already decided to leave if no one showed in 5 more minutes. Then the door opened. A gust of wind swept in behind her along with the soft patter of rain. She stood at the threshold, drenched, her blonde curls clinging to her face. A worn second-hand coat soaked through at the shoulders, and a faded canvas backpack slung over one side. Her shoes were scuffed, her jeans cuffed unevenly, and yet her eyes sparkled with something unexplainable. Hope. The hostess stepped forward quickly, concern knitting her brows. "Ma'am, I think you might be. I have a reservation under James Cartwright," the young woman said calmly, her voice steady but soft. James looked up, caught off guard. The woman gave the hostess a polite nod, and made her way through the restaurant, her wet shoes squeaking faintly against the tile. She reached the table, gave him a small sheepish smile, and sat down without adjusting her coat. He blinked. This could not be right. This was her. She did not apologize for her appearance. She did not try to explain the rain or the backpack or why she looked like she had walked a mile through a storm. Instead, she reached into her bag, carefully pulling out a small square bundle wrapped in newspaper and tied with what looked like a fraying old handkerchief. She placed it gently on the table between them. James stared at it, then at her. She was looking at him with eyes that were tired but kind. Quietly confident in a way that unsettled him. She pushed the package toward him and said softly, "It's silly, but I made this when I had nothing, and I thought maybe someone like you needed something real." He hesitated, then untied the knot. The paper unfolded to reveal a small wooden keychain, hand-carved, the edges smooth and imperfect. Words were etched across the grain in delicate script. "Home is not a place, it's someone." James held it in his hands, saying nothing, but something in his chest shifted, subtle, unfamiliar. He looked up at the soaked woman across from him, and for the first time in a long time, he could not find the words to fit the moment. James turned the wooden keychain over in his hand, his thumb tracing the words carved into its surface. It was such a simple thing, flawed, handmade, clearly crafted with care. It caught him off guard in a way few things ever did anymore. He studied the woman across from him. Emma, she had introduced herself with a quiet, steady voice, no hint of nervousness, no makeup carefully applied to impress. She sat with wet curls draping her shoulders, her coat still damp and clinging to her arms. Yet she made no effort to fuss with her appearance. For a long moment, James said nothing. His mind was somewhere else entirely. He remembered the first time he realized people didn't love without conditions. He had been 21, a college senior, madly in love with a girl named Julia. She had bright eyes, a fast laugh, and expensive taste. When his family lost everything in the financial collapse, when the country club cards were revoked, when his father filed for bankruptcy, Julia left just like that. One dinner where he told her the truth, and by the next morning, she was gone. That was the first fracture. The rest came later in layers. As James climbed the ranks in the financial world, he earned respect, power, wealth. But with each success came a new level of detachment. Women smiled at him with carefully curated charm, laughed a little too quickly, complimented him in ways that felt rehearsed. They already knew who he was. James Cartwright, CEO. They were interested in the title, not the man. He went on dozens of dates over the years, always ending the same way. A quick drink, polite conversation. Then the moment he felt that familiar shift, when they dropped some hint about his net worth or accidentally mentioned a friend who worked in fashion PR, he would excuse himself and never call again. Tonight, he had expected more of the same. When he saw Emma walk in soaked and rumpled, he had assumed she was just another kind of pretense. But the keychain, it shook something loose. Still unsure, he asked, "Do you know who I am?" Emma shrugged, her eyes warm but unaffected. "You're James. We were matched for a reason, I guess. You seemed like someone who might be worth meeting." He raised an eyebrow. "That's all. I don't Google people before I meet them," she replied. Matter-of-factly. Kind of takes the mystery out of it. James blinked. That was new. She leaned forward slightly, resting her elbows on the table. "I like walking in the rain," she said. "I don't mind getting wet. It feels honest in a way. Nothing to hide behind when you're dripping wet." That made him chuckle despite himself. Her words were strange yet oddly profound. "I grew up in a group home," she continued. "Moved around a lot. Books were my escape. Libraries were warm and free. Ever since I was little, I dreamed of opening a bookshop, one with a corner where people can just breathe. No pressure, no noise, just paper and quiet." James studied her face. There was no performance in her voice, no agenda. She was speaking as if she had nothing to prove. Because maybe she didn't. After a pause, he asked, "Why did you agree to a blind date if you didn't even know who I was?" Emma smiled. And it was the kind of smile that did not ask for anything in return. "Because I wasn't looking for a resume. I was looking for a person." James looked down at the keychain again, his chest tightening with something unnameable. It had been so long since anyone looked at him and saw anything other than the suit. Emma shifted in her seat, brushing a damp curl from her cheek. The warmth of the restaurant had begun to dry the rain on her coat, but the fabric still clung to her sleeves. Her hands, resting on the table, were calloused. Small details, James noticed in silence. "I make things," she said, breaking the momentary stillness. "Woodwork. Mostly small things. Keychains, bookmarks, trinkets. I sell them on Etsy when I can." James tilted his head slightly. "You're a woodworker. I guess you could call it that," she replied with a small smile. "I carve by hand. My tools are old, my workspace is tiny. And my income's, well, let's just say unpredictable." There was no shame in her voice. No defensiveness, just facts laid out plainly. She did not rush to justify her lifestyle or soften the edges of it. "I live in a studio apartment above a bakery. The oven downstairs keeps my place warm in the winter. Most days I work at a coffee shop in the mornings. The rest of the time I carve. Sometimes I sell, sometimes I don't." She reached for the faded canvas backpack, leaning beside her chair, lifting it gently into her lap. The zipper creaked as she pulled it open. Inside were scraps of cloth, bits of twine, carving tools wrapped in worn fabric, and several small wooden items bundled with care. She picked one up, then another, showing them briefly before tucking them back. "These aren't for sale," she said softly. "I make them for people I care about. Sometimes when I meet someone I think might need something real, I give them one." James watched her carefully. Everything about her contradicted the world he knew. The curated perfection, the strategic conversations, the calculated generosity of high society. Emma, with her fraying sleeves and quiet conviction, was completely out of place. And yet nothing about her felt false. He had met people with less and seen them desperate to prove their worth. Emma did not prove. She simply existed, steady, open. Why would he ask, genuinely curious? "It's honest," she answered. "If you force it, it cracks. You have to listen to it. Work with the grain, not against it." James nodded slowly, feeling that same unease return. The discomfort of realizing he was sitting across from someone who lived entirely differently and yet seemed more grounded than anyone he knew. Emma looked toward the hallway, then excused herself politely to use the restroom. As she stood, her backpack tipped slightly, and a few items spilled onto the floor. James instinctively reached down to help, catching a small leather-bound notebook that had fallen open. He meant to close it quickly, but one handwritten line on the open page caught his eye. "When you have nothing left to give, give what cannot be taken. Trust and kindness." James froze. The sentence hit something raw in him. He had spent so long protecting himself from the world, building walls with money, contracts, reputation. And here was this woman with barely enough to get by, offering pieces of herself to strangers without fear. He gently closed the notebook and placed it back into her bag, his expression unreadable. When Emma returned moments later, James looked at her differently, not with pity nor curiosity, but with a slow, dawning respect. She sat down, unaware of what he had seen, but something between them had shifted, like the faint sound of wood cracking, not from pressure, but from being opened. The rain outside had softened into a mist, streaking the window beside them with quiet trails. Inside the vintage restaurant, the evening crowd was thinning, and the warm amber light now felt more intimate than cozy. James stirred the remnants of his coffee while Emma sat across from him, gently folding and unfolding the edge of the napkin in her lap. She looked thoughtful, as if debating something. Then she spoke, not abruptly, but like opening a door that had long been locked. "I was 5 the day my mother left me," she began, her voice calm but low. "She walked me to the front steps of Street Margaret's children's home and told me we were going on a short trip. I waited for her to come back for hours." James looked up, surprised by the directness of her tone. There was no self-pity in it, just memory. "She left me with a small suitcase and a cloth-wrapped lunch I never ate. The only thing I've kept from that day is the handkerchief she used to tie the food up with." Emma reached down, unzipped her backpack slowly, and pulled out the same handkerchief, the one that had wrapped the gift she gave him earlier. "I've used it ever since," she said, "to wrap things I don't want to lose." James swallowed, uncertain of what to say. The emotion behind her words wasn't loud. It was lived in, etched into her voice like grain in wood. "I moved through a dozen homes before I turned 16, she continued. "Some were kind. Most were just places. Places that taught me to be small, not take up space, not expect too much." Emma shifted in her seat, staring briefly at the ceiling like she was watching a memory projected above them. "I remember one winter when I was about 14. I had saved up $62, working odd jobs, cleaning yards, selling little carvings I made in school. It was all I had, and I was proud of it." She smiled faintly. "Then I met a girl sleeping on a bench outside the bus station. She couldn't have been more than 10, shoes full of holes, crying because she was cold and hungry." James watched her closely now, drawn in by the quiet power of her story. "I bought her socks, food, a bus ticket to the nearest shelter. I gave her everything I had, even the scarf I was wearing." She laughed softly. "My foster mother was furious, said it was irresponsible. But later that week, the girl left a note at the shelter for me. It just said, 'Thank you for seeing me.'" Emma paused, then looked James straight in the eye. "I know I look like I have nothing, but I promise you, I've got more heart than I'll ever know what to do with." The weight of her words settled heavily over the table. James did not speak. Instead, his hand drifted toward the small wooden keychain, still resting near his coffee cup. He touched it gently, as if afraid it might disappear under too much pressure. The silence between them was no longer awkward. It was reverent. Without a word, James flagged the server, quietly paid the check, and leaned in to whisper something to her. The server nodded. Then he turned back to Emma. "I'd like to walk you home," he said simply. Emma tilted her head, unsure if he meant it out of politeness or something more, but she smiled and nodded, pulling her bag over her shoulder. Outside, the rain had picked up again. The server handed her a brand new umbrella at the door, wrapped neatly in plastic. "There's no name," the server said. "Just said it was from someone who thinks you deserve to stay dry." Emma raised an eyebrow at James, but he only shrugged, pretending not to know a thing. As they stepped into the rain, James held the umbrella high, not over himself, but tilted completely toward Emma, his shoulder and arm quickly soaked, but he did not seem to care. She noticed, of course. She always noticed the quiet things. They walked in silence for a few blocks, their steps echoing softly against the wet pavement. As they turned a corner, a frail figure came into view. A hunched elderly woman sitting on the edge of a stoop, soaked to the bone and clutching a plastic bag for warmth. Emma stopped. Without hesitation, she knelt in front of the woman, reaching into her backpack. From it, she pulled another hand-carved keychain, smaller, delicate, with soft, rounded edges, and a single message burned into the wood. "You are not forgotten." She placed it into the woman's trembling hands with a tenderness that made time slow down. James stood behind her, unmoving, as if witnessing something sacred. And in that quiet, rain-soaked moment, watching Emma kneel on a cold sidewalk to give something she could have sold, something she had made with her own hands, James realized this was what he had been searching for all along. Not wealth, not perfection, but a heart that still believed in giving. A few days had passed since that rainy evening in the vintage restaurant, but James could not shake the image of her. Emma, the way her blonde curls had clung to her face soaked from the storm, the steadiness in her voice, the quiet strength in her eyes. She had not flinched at his title or tried to impress him. She had simply been real. While the city pulsed around him, cabs honking, phones ringing, emails stacking up in red bubbles. James found himself retreating inward. He sat through boardroom meetings and investor calls, nodded through pitches and presentations, but everything felt muted, blurred. Back on the 45th floor of Cartwright Financial, surrounded by pristine glass walls, curated artwork, and a view of the Manhattan skyline, James resumed his role as the polished executive everyone expected. Mr. Cartwright, they called him. Never James. Meetings were conducted with precision. Lunches were booked weeks in advance. His schedule was airtight, but his mind was elsewhere. Every now and then he caught himself glancing at the small wooden keychain on his desk, the one she had given him with its imperfect edges and delicate script. Home is not a place, it's someone. Late one night, long after everyone else had gone home, James sat in his office with the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the windows. He opened his laptop, hesitated a moment, then typed in her name. It did not take long to find her. Her Etsy shop, titled Emma's Carvings, Handmade with Heart, was simple. The page had no professional branding, no sleek logo. The product photos were taken on what looked like her kitchen table with natural light and handwritten price tags. But it was the description at the bottom that made James sit back in his chair, heart quiet. 10% of every order goes toward creating free gifts for those who have nothing because everyone deserves to feel seen. It was not just a slogan. It was Emma distilled into one line. And for days afterward, James could not get it out of his head. He thought about her when he passed luxury stores on Fifth Avenue, when he watched interns scramble to impress him, when he signed off on bonuses for people who would never know the name of a single child in need. That Saturday, James did something he had not done in over a decade. He left his penthouse without his driver. Dressed in jeans and a hoodie, he pulled a baseball cap low over his face and took the subway. The screeching rails, the worn seats, the chipped tile stations, all of it felt strangely grounding. He arrived in a quieter part of Brooklyn, the streets unfamiliar but welcoming. He followed the sound of children laughing to a modest brick building, the community center where Emma volunteered. He stepped inside unnoticed and stood near the back of a sunlit room that smelled faintly of wood shavings and old paint. There she was. Emma knelt on the floor, surrounded by a small circle of children. She wore an old apron splattered with dried paint. Her hair was pulled into a messy bun, a pencil stuck behind her ear. Her sleeves were rolled up, revealing arms smudged with pencil marks and wood dust. She was helping a young boy carefully hold a burning tool over a piece of soft pine, guiding his tiny fingers with patience and care. James watched in silence. There was no performance in her, no camera, no donors to impress, just presence. One little girl stood out to him. She had soft brown curls and wore a pink dress slightly too large for her frame. She leaned against Emma's side with the natural ease of someone who had known safety there. "Mia, what do you want to write on yours?" Emma asked, her voice soft. "I want mine to say, 'I am strong,'" the girl said. Emma smiled, her whole face lighting up. "That's perfect." James felt something shift in him. He had spent his life surrounded by ambition, noise, deals. But this was something far rarer. It was real. Then came a question from a boy who looked no older than 10. His voice cut through the room like a thread of truth. "Miss Emma, do you believe rich people care about us?" The children went quiet. Emma did, too. She looked up, eyes thoughtful, and answered slowly. "Some do. They just forgot how to show it." James inhaled sharply. Forgotten. That word echoed in him. He had spent so long building a life to be remembered by the world that he had forgotten how to see it, how to care. He slipped out before she noticed him. The city outside was the same as it had always been. Horns blaring, crosswalks flashing, people moving fast. But to James, it all felt different now. He had walked into that community center thinking he might learn more about her. Instead, he had learned more about himself. The news had spread faster than James anticipated. Photos of him standing beside Emma outside the community center, his expensive coat soaked through from rain, had gone viral. Headlines followed, some praising him for stepping away from corporate sterility to embrace humanity, others condemning the stunt as reckless, a distraction, a CEO abandoning responsibility. Then came the consequences. Within days, Cartwright Financial lost a major investor, a tech conglomerate that had been in talks for months. The board panicked, emergency meetings were called, PR teams scrambled, and before James could say a word in defense, he was called into a closed-door session, and handed a letter of suspension, indefinite leave of absence, pending internal review. Just like that, the title was gone. James packed a single overnight bag and returned to an apartment he had not seen in years. A modest walk-up near the university, a place he had bought when he still believed success meant something other than power. The walls were bare, the mattress firm, the fridge empty, but the silence felt honest. He shut off his phone, let the emails pile up, let the headlines swirl. For once, he had nothing to manage except himself. Days passed in stillness until a quiet knock came at the door one evening. When he opened it, there she stood. Emma. She held no umbrella. No speech prepared, just a small paper bag of groceries and a quiet smile. "I figured you forgot to eat," she said simply. He let her in. They sat at the old table near the window as twilight filled the room. For a long while, neither spoke. Then, with no warning, the weight of it all cracked open in him. James lowered his head into his hands and cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, but like a man who had held himself together for far too long. Emma did not rush to comfort him. She let him feel it. Then she reached across the table and took his hand. "You gave up the world for me," she said gently. "Let me give it back to you in a way that matters more." Weeks later, the community center's doors opened again, but this time with new life. James and Emma stood side by side beneath a freshly painted sign. The Carved Hope Project, a place to build something real. Emma taught the children and the elderly how to carve kind messages into small pieces of wood, keychains, tokens, bookmarks, each one gifted to someone who needed to feel seen. James taught simple budgeting, job prep, and how to open a bank account. He coached people who had never been spoken to, like equals. One afternoon, a volunteer captured a quiet moment on video. James, sitting cross-legged beside an elderly man in a wool cap, slowly sanding a wooden keychain while Emma, just behind them, carved the words, "You matter," into another. The video went viral, but this time the narrative changed. Former CEO trades boardroom for community center, the headline read. And for once, James did not care what they called him. He had never felt more like himself. At a local community event a few months later, Emma stood on a small stage, her apron smudged with wood stain, smiling out at a room filled with children, families, volunteers, and strangers who had become a part of something real. During the Q&A, a young woman in the back raised her hand. "Miss Emma," she asked, "how do you know someone truly loves you?" Emma glanced toward James, who was standing by the back door, arms folded, watching her the way someone watches the only thing that ever made sense. She smiled and said into the mic, "When he's willing to lose everything the world calls important, just to keep the one thing that really is." The room fell into a hush, then applause. Long heartfelt applause. James crossed the room, stepped onto the stage, and took her hand. In that moment, he did not feel like a fallen CEO or a man rebuilding. He felt found. He felt home. It was a golden afternoon in early fall, the kind Brooklyn reserved for its quietest joys. The sidewalk outside the little corner bookstore was speckled with leaves, crisp and curled, dancing in the breeze. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the shop, catching on the wooden sign that hung above the door. Emma's little corner, a place to breathe. Inside, the scent of old books, pinewood, and cinnamon tea lingered in the air. Warmth radiated from the soft lighting, the cozy reading nooks, and the love tucked into every detail of the space. Near the back, a little girl darted between two shelves, laughing, twirling. Her brown curls bounced with each step, and the hem of her pink dress fluttered like petals in spring. "Mommy, look what I found," she called, holding up a book nearly half her size. Emma looked up from behind the counter where she was tying a ribbon around a carved bookmark. "Be gentle, Mia," she said with a smile. "That one's older than both of us combined." The girl giggled and tiptoed away, hugging the book to her chest. Mia had once been the quiet child in a crowded community center, shy, uncertain, often overlooked. But now at 5 years old, she had found her voice, her home, and her family. She was no longer just a name on a case file. She was Mia Cartwright, legally adopted 1 year ago by the two people who had promised never to let her feel forgotten again. At the front of the shop, James was arranging a small table display, budget planners, simple financial workbooks, and tiny wooden tokens that read, "You can start again." His sleeves were rolled up and a pencil was tucked behind his ear. No suit, no boardroom, no title beyond the one that mattered most. Husband, father, helper. He no longer ran a company. Now he helped people build their own futures. He ran workshops twice a week in the back room of the bookstore, teaching job-seeking adults how to manage money, write resumes, and believe in second chances. Near the children's section stood a special bookshelf with a carved wooden label. From the broken to the brave. It held pieces made by people who had been through addiction, homelessness, loss. Each item tagged not with a price, but a name and a date. Some buyers cried when they picked something up. Some left notes in return. That evening, as the sun dipped low and the lamps were turned on one by one, a light rain began to fall outside. Emma moved through the shop, humming softly as she tidied up. While looking for a spare price tag in her old backpack, she found something tucked in the bottom pocket. She pulled it out slowly, a worn handkerchief, and wrapped inside the very first wooden keychain she had ever carved for someone else. The one she had given James on their blind date, the one that started it all. She sat down on the small window bench, Mia climbing up beside her. "What's that?" the girl asked, pointing. Emma placed the keychain in her small hands. "That's the first thing I ever gave your daddy." Mia studied it. "Is this what made Daddy love you?" Emma smiled, brushing a curl from the girl's forehead. "No," she said gently. "It just helped him remember that love is the only thing worth having." Just then, the front door creaked open, letting in the soft scent of rain. James stepped inside, shaking droplets from his jacket, his eyes instantly finding the two people who now meant everything to him. He crossed the room, pulled both of them into a quiet, warm embrace, then took the keychain from Mia's hand. With care, he walked to the front of the shop, and on a small hook just below the wooden store sign, he hung the keychain like a symbol, a promise never broken, engraved on it, faded, but still clear. Home is not a place, it's someone. Outside, the rain continued to fall, soft and forgiving. Inside, laughter and light. And for the first time in a long, long time, everything was exactly where it was meant to be. Thank you for joining us on this beautiful journey of love, resilience, and the quiet power of kindness. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of what truly matters, don't forget to hit that hype button to show your support. Share your thoughts in the comments. We read everyone, and subscribe to soul-stirring stories for more tales that heal, inspire, and stay with you long after the screen fades to black. Until next time, home is not a place, it's someone. Stay kind, stay human. Stay with us.